Hi, I'm Greg Corombos. Our guest this week on Veterans Chronicles is retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Martha McSally. You may know her better as U.S. Senator Martha McSally from the great state of Arizona. She's also the author of the new book, Dare to Fly, Simple Lessons in Never Giving Up. So for the course of this program, we're going to be looking at her trailblazing career in the United States Air Force and also how that informs her public service now as a member of the U.S. Senate and some of the important lessons that she's learned along the way and are incorporated in her new book. And Senator, it's great to have you with us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Greg.
Where were you born and raised?
I actually grew up in Warwick, Rhode Island.
And so a far distance from Arizona. We'll explain how you got to Arizona a little bit later in the interview. But one of the things you talk about early in the book is at the age of 12, you lost your dad, and that changed your life in a number of key ways. How so?
It did. Well, my dad really is a great example of the American dream. He came from very humble circumstances. His dad passed away before he was born. His mom passed away when he was a teenager. He started working at the age of 8 and never stopped. And through hard work and service in the Navy and using his GI Bill and, people believing in him, he was given opportunities that only happened in America. And he was very driven to make a better life for us kids. I was the youngest of 5. And I benefit from all that. I didn't even know much of this, honestly, until I was an adult. Grew up in a middle-class family, 3 older brothers, 1 older sister. And my dad, again, worked hard as an attorney. He was the head of the school committee. And I lived a very stable life, very, wonderful opportunities. And then all of a sudden my life was turned upside down. It's the summer of 1978. And I was 12 years old. One day we were hanging out as a family on the beach. And then my dad went upstairs to lie down. He wasn't feeling well. And then my brother and my mom took him to the hospital. And she came home that night and said he had a heart attack. I didn't even know what that was. I was 12. But he was stable and he was going to be fine. And in the middle of the night, my dad just knew in his spirit that he was going to die. And he said, get my children now. I need to see my children. And I was blessed that he was in tune to that, because I got woken up in the middle of the night, brought to the hospital, and I got to visit with him a little bit. I didn't understand a lot of the context of what was going on, but in the time I got to spend with him, among other things we talked about, he told me to make him proud. And the next day he had another heart attack and passed away. And man, that was not an easy time. Adolescence is hard anyway. And at a young age, dealing with the grief and the loss, but the weight of his words and trying to navigate all that. And now my mom's a single mom, 5 kids. She goes back to school and back to work to continue to, lead the family. And it just, that was a defining moment in my life. And by the grace of God, I got through some of those really, really tough years. But I learned at an early age, I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. Every day is a gift, and we should do something meaningful with our lives to make a difference for others. Many other lessons there from my dad and that journey. I share them in the book, Dare to Fly. And everybody listening can relate to grief and loss and suffering and dark days of feeling despairing. And I just share my path and how I found my footing and found my faith and found my purpose through all that. And I think everybody can relate to that.
Now, you initially wanted to be a doctor, but you ended up at the U.S. Air Force Academy. So how did that happen, and how did you shift from one dream to the other? Well,
I was motion sick, shy, pudgy kid, just in context. So I was looking for opportunities. I'm feisty though, and I've always had that kind of feisty spirit. And I was looking for opportunities to get a good education. My parents always taught me, education is the key to our future. But I didn't want to saddle my mom with debt. So as I looked for options that would get a good education, the Air Force Academy, you pay back in service. Also, I thought it would channel my energy in a positive, purposeful way. I kind of was self-aware enough to know I could have gone either way. You make these decisions when you're 17. And so off I went, but I thought I wanted to be a doctor, and that was my dream. I realized later that I was more attached to losing my dad and trying to save other kids from going through that, but it wasn't my calling. When I got to the academy, for the first time in my life, I was told I couldn't do something just because I was a girl. It was against the law for women to be fighter pilots, and it just pissed me off. And so that's where I channeled my feisty spirit into I'm going to be the first woman fighter pilot. And everyone laughed at me. They were like, it's against the law, Martha. And I would say we live in America. Laws change. And I'm going to keep this dream in my heart, and I'm going to keep excelling where I am. I'm not going to be bitter. There were some challenging days for sure, but don't have a chip on your shoulder. Keep blooming where you're planted, lead and grow. And then I just was blessed to be in the right place at the right time. When the door opened, But that's where I shifted my dream, was at the academy when I had to find my dream and my calling, but it was because they told me that I couldn't.
And there were some challenges even along the way. There was, I believe, a minimum height requirement being 5'4", and you're just a smidge under that, or were at the time. And so you were hanging upside down from your ankles trying to stretch yourself. At one point you hurt a finger, and that might have scrubbed you. And so did you feel like the rules were just tough in general, or did you feel like they were setting up obstacles to prevent you from reaching your dream?
Well, the height limits were for a reason, although I just saw last week they've now eliminated them all, and they're looking at people as individuals. Just, can you fit in the cockpit? Can you reach the pedals? Can you see over the dashboard? Can you get out of a spin? And I actually went through that process because it was a little bit too short. My sitting height was okay, but my leg length total, it ends up, my total height was a little too short. And so I passed everything, but then you just had bureaucrats saying no. So that was my first experience with a crew bureaucracy, these nameless, faceless people who are just taking the path of least resistance. It wasn't personal to me, but they were denying me and others our dream, even when we were qualified. So I learned early on, like, okay, you got to figure out how to persist, be creative, persevere through these obstacles. Don't let your dream die. And then right after we got through all this and I got an exception, right around the same time for my height, I broke my hand, and it's still kind of messed up, but I broke my hand. It's a long story. You can read it in the book. Some not smart decisions on my part took away my pilot clearance after all that. And it took me 4 surgeries a couple of years later for me to finally get cleared to fly. There's a lesson in this as well, though. I mean, I made some decisions. We say when we clear pilots solo, don't do anything dumb, dangerous, or different. And that's the story of my finger breaking because that derailed me there. But because I was derailed, I went to graduate school for a couple of years. I got a scholarship. And then I went to pilot training. And then they changed the law, but still they didn't change the policy allowing women. So I went off to be an instructor pilot for a few years to just keep building my skills. But had I not been derailed, had I not been delayed, when the policy finally changed, I wouldn't have been in the right place at the right time in order to break the barrier and be in the first group to fly fighters and the first to fly in combat. So there's lessons in all of this. I'm a person of faith. I truly believe sometimes you can't see, and these are good lessons for right now, where your dreams are being derailed or you have to take a detour, whether it was from your own mistakes or some circumstances outside your control. You just sometimes can't see the big picture. I mean, God had a plan, right? And I was able to break through those barriers because I was detoured and allowed me to kind of continue on my path. So you shouldn't be bitter in the moment. Have a heart of gratitude for the opportunities you have, excel where you are. And that was, it wasn't easy. Every day wasn't that way. I didn't just leap out of bed, but in my human experience of it all, it actually put me on my path for being a fighter pilot. And if I'd gotten my way, I wouldn't have had that chance.
One of the things you mentioned in the book is that even though you were being told this isn't going to happen, this is not the policy, there were people telling you, just hang on a few years. I think this is probably going to change. How much did that make a difference in pushing you forward?
It did make a difference. I finished pilot training. They had just changed the law. I was 5th in my class. I should have been able to pick a fighter, but they wouldn't let me because they didn't change the policy. And that process I talk about in the book, I did not plan well for that moment in time. I wouldn't advise how I did that in picking my assignment out of pilot training. I didn't think through contingencies for somebody who normally plans. But as I was standing there alone trying to figure out, what should I do? I chose to be an instructor pilot, not a popular job. But I thought I could keep building my airmanship and my flying experience. And if I had gone off to fly a cargo or tanker plane, they never would have sent me over to fly fighters. So it built me time. And I had a commander at the time who was like, this is exactly the right choice. You did the right thing. It didn't feel right at the moment, but he just encouraged me, be patient, keep excelling, and the door is going to open. And it did. So I think for all of us, we need those wingmen in our lives. We never fly solo. We always have somebody on our wing to watch our back, to give us perspective. And that helped me get through those days, not just that person, but several others.
So when did you meet and fall in love with the A-10?
Oh my gosh. The A-10 is an amazing plane. I had the choice of any fighter when they finally opened the doors for women. I had the F-15, the F-16, F-15E, F-111, or A-10. And I can't put my finger on the moment, but as I studied the different missions, I just thought the A-10 is this beautiful ugly, down and dirty plane. Its mission is to show up on the front lines when Americans are on the ground under fire and they need air support in order to stay alive. And I just thought it just matched my personality. It's a very gritty mission. It's very, there's risk obviously with being right down there, but it's an incredibly survivable plane, which again is a little bit of a metaphor for my life, I think, of just going through difficult things and just continuing to, take a licking and keep on ticking. So it's just an extraordinary plane. The folklore is they built the 30-millimeter gun and then went to the engineers and said, figure out how to fly that gun. Single seat, no two-seat models, no simulators. So my first flight was solo, never having flown it before.
So take us to that day. You're over in the Gulf now. It's Operation Southern Watch, which is the fancy name for patrolling the no-fly zones following the Gulf War. And you find out that you're going to meet this moment in history. You're going to be the first woman to fly a combat mission. What's it like?
Yeah, I didn't know that at the time. I was very focused on just being the best A-10 pilot that I could be. I had just finished my training. It's about 6 months of training to get checked out in the Warthog. And then very quickly, Saddam Hussein was threatening to come south again. So they deployed one A-10 squadron. And 90 days later, we went back to this bare bones base, Al Jaber, to replace them. And so we deployed. I had just barely gotten checked out, was new in the squadron. We deployed over there, just still studying in the books, trying to be a good wingman, and then took off on my first mission. And every time we cross, even in training, we cross over into enemy territory. We do what's called a fence check, fence in. We turn off our emitters, we turn on our weapons and light everything up. And I remember looking down at the berm below, crossing between Kuwait and Iraq. And even though it was no-fly zone patrolling, if you had an issue, if they were still over time, they were getting more hostile. But if you had an issue and you had to eject, you are now at serious risk of becoming a prisoner of war and having to get out of hostile territory. So the risks were real, even though it was a very weird geopolitical situation. And yeah, I was definitely nervous. I was like, all right, I hope I was paying attention in class, right? To just be a good wingman, fly the jet well, pay attention, look out for the threat, support my flight lead, do what they tell me to do. And then over time, of course, I became a flight lead, and you gain more confidence in the mission. But still, every time you fly in combat, most of my combat time is in Afghanistan. Those risks are real for you and people on the ground. But it's amazing how men and women every single day continue to sign up to do that in order to defend our freedoms. It was an absolute honor. I found out later I was the first to deploy and first to fly a combat mission. I was focused at the time on flying my jet and staying in position.
Did Saddam give you any trouble?
No, not that day, but there were some other days. One time I got locked up by a Roland missile, which is one of the more challenging tactical missiles that they had. And had to do maneuvers and chaff and flare and jamming in order to be able to unlock and defeat it. So I was able to do that and make it home safely. Again, you do what you're trained to do at the time. You think about it more later when you get back on the ground.
Some of the other principles in your book include don't walk by a problem that you see, even if it doesn't necessarily apply to you. And you actually spend 2 chapters on a lengthy story in your life, which deals with seeing what female service members had to endure, particularly in Saudi Arabia, forced to wear the traditional Muslim garb for women. If you were off base, you had to be accompanied by a male. I mean, basically everything that applied to a female citizen of Saudi Arabia. And even while you were stationed in Kuwait, you're thinking, this isn't right. You decide to challenge it, even asking a question of the defense secretary at the time. And then the next thing you know, you're actually assigned to Saudi Arabia, and it really ratchets up. So explain why you decided to take on the fight even before you knew it would apply to you, and what it entailed to actually win.
Well, this goes back to one of the lessons of my book, which is don't ever walk by a problem. And this is something that veterans and those in the military understand, right? If you see something's wrong, do something about it right then. Don't be a bystander. And so that day in Kuwait, again, I was focused on being a good wingman. Women had just transitioned into fighters. So I was also trying to prove we belong there. The last thing I wanted to do personally for me was raise some women's issue, just to be frank. But I saw a picture of this young enlisted woman on the duty desk in one of the local newspapers or newsletters. I can't even remember what the document was. First, I thought it was a Saudi woman, and then I saw it was an army enlisted with the full black Muslim headscarf and abaya gown, and it was like, this is the proper way to wear the abaya. And I was like, what? And I just felt this conviction, like, this is wrong. It doesn't apply to me, but as an American, as an officer, this is wrong. I never would have imagined I'd then be on an 8-year journey to try and overturn this policy. First, doing research about it. Where does it come from? Those in the military can understand this. Often there's a lot of folklore. People think, oh, something's above my pay grade, or it's law, it's policy. So I went on this journey. Where is it written down? Is it law? Is it policy? Long story short, even though everybody thought it was part of a status of forces agreement, comes down to it was a 2-star general's policy, the local dress and personal appearance regulation. When I finally actually told the 2 stars, I was getting ready over 5 years later to go to Saudi Arabia. I've been trying to change this thing for those women because they didn't have the voice that I had. And he said, there's nothing I can do about it. It's above my pay grade. It was his policy handed down to him by his predecessors. The State Department wasn't doing it. They would not have advised it. So it's a classic case in what I call bureaucratic policy creep, where one thing just gets more ridiculous over time and everybody just sort of defends it without knowing the origins. But I was able to unravel it, and with persistence and creativity and support from others, in the end, I filed a lawsuit, Martha McSally versus Donald Rumsfeld. Not an easy decision to wake up in the morning as an active duty officer saying, I'm going to sue the Secretary of Defense today. But, I know we have 3 branches of the government. I gave one branch the opportunity to fix it. They didn't. And that's why we have the other 2 branches. And in the end, I was on a 1-woman lobbying campaign, and I got legislation passed unanimously and signed into law to overturn it. And last year, I was in Saudi Arabia, driving a car in Western clothes. It was great closure to this whole battle. I was convicted at the time, if anyone's a person of faith, when I reached out for advice about the story of Esther in the Old Testament. And I'll let people read it themselves. But there was this line in there as I was struggling. Do I stand up for these women, or do I just do what's easier for me? And the line was, can it be that you were put in this position for such a time as this? And that just really gripped me. That could it be that I was given this opportunity to be an officer, to be a fighter pilot, in order to, at this moment, fight for these young enlisted women that are putting up with these ridiculous medieval restrictions. And that's what motivated me through the whole journey each time.
And it was tough. You point out the hypocrisy of the male members of the military could walk around in polo shirts and shorts. Yeah. And I think they had to claim you as their wife out in public, right?
Yes. The policy got so ridiculous. Our top core value in the Air Force is integrity first. All the other services, right? We always have integrity and honor in our core values. And we literally had a policy saying, if stopped by the religious police in order to comply with Sharia law, that the male service member was to claim me as their wife instead of their commander or their boss or whatever, their fellow service member. It was ridiculous. It was so against our values. It was so against even why we serve. And if we gotta go somewhere and be sensitive to their culture, don't shake with your left hand or show the bottom of your feet, that's one thing. But this was a ridiculous extreme of taking their medieval policies and abandoning our values as Americans and in the military, and it had just gone too far.
And in a way, it was 9/11 that provided some additional momentum because, as you mentioned in the book, you had Laura Bush and others out there saying, freedom's on the way. These women are in burqas, and that's terrible in Afghanistan. And here you are having to follow that sort of dress code in Saudi Arabia. So
honestly, I couldn't believe it. I was in Saudi Arabia on 9/11. So now I've been trying to change it from the inside this whole time, right? From the inside the Defense Department. And then 9/11 happens. We were going into Afghanistan, and everyone's talking about us freeing the Afghani women from this oppression as symbolized by the burqa. And I remember sitting in the operations center as I was watching one of these interviews. We're all there on the operations floor. I was running our combat search and rescue. And I'm looking around, I'm like, does anybody see the irony of this? The very people who are freeing these women from the burqa are being forced to wear a burqa by our own military. It just was ridiculous. But it resonated with the American people. It resonated with lawmakers and others. And that's what really allowed me in that moment to get the momentum to finally overturn it.
Yeah, what you just said is really important because I know from reading your book, there was one commander who said you're the only person who cares about this. And as you found out quickly, that was certainly not true.
No, I remember that. One of my lowest moments in the military as I tried to speak reason to him, and he didn't want to listen and just wanted to be risk averse, to get through his assignment, and yelling at me saying, I'm the only one who cares about this. And I remember sitting in the gallery of the United States House of Representatives in my uniform. I just happened to be in DC when the House unanimously passed my legislation to overturn these policies, And I remember, I say it in the book, I am not the only one who cares about this. Me and 435 representatives of the people of America do, you jerk. I remember saying that to myself. And then in the end, we got it through the Senate. And I was back in Saudi, actually, when President Bush signed the defense bill into law, finally overturning it.
I mean, I don't know if they saw you as a troublemaker. I'm guessing a few of them did. And it kind of goes back to how some of them saw you as a woman in uniform. You talk in the book about how there was one, and I don't want to give away more details of the book, but the hog logs, and there were some less than nice things said about you. Some of your early commanders kind of made it clear that they didn't want you there. So how long did it take the general public that you were serving with to realize you were one of the crew?
Yeah, there were some real challenges for us. I was in the 9th class of women at the Air Force Academy. So, we were breaking into the culture for sure. And so I was kind of used to being kind of in that good old boy network, or, trying to just show that we belonged and that women could be patriots too. And when we transitioned into fighters, leadership matters, right? You set the culture and the tone and the values of an organization from the top. Our chief of staff of the Air Force had been testifying before Congress about how he'd rather pick a less qualified woman over a more qualified man for fighter cockpits. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, this is America. The plane doesn't care if you're a boy or girl. So that was kind of the environment that we had when we transitioned. I'm not complaining about it. It's just real. And there were some very isolating days there. There were a lot of good people. A lot of men that I served with, they just they're like brothers to me. But, you can have a couple of people who poison the environment, who are jerks. There was some pretty tough harassment, pretty tough hostility. I don't want to undermine it. There were some days where I wasn't sure if I wanted to even go in and continue to serve. And I didn't understand it. Like, the enemy's out there. The enemy's not each other. And I had some great commanders as well who really intervened and ensured that there was a culture. They're not going to give me a break. I'm not asking for a break. I'm just asking, like, hey, treat me as one of your own. We're all in this together. The bad guys are out there. And so we were able to pave that way. I think, I had another woman come into my squadron a few years later, Amy Svoboda, and actually 23 years ago tomorrow, she passed away in an A-10 crash out on the Barry Goldwater Range right near here. As she transitioned into my squadron, it was the first time I had a woman around, and it was a little, at first you're wondering, like, is she going to measure up? We're often compete with each other. And I saw the way she was treated, and I said, all right, I think the environment is really changing. But sometimes you have a Neanderthal show up here and there, and you got to convince them one person at a time, and that's okay. I understand it, but I really think we have come a long way.
All right, let's continue our timeline now. So 9/11 has occurred. You are in Saudi Arabia at the time. How soon were you then sent to Afghanistan, or at least that theater?
Yeah, so I actually was in Saudi Arabia for a 1-year remote 9/11. I extended for the early operations in Afghanistan, running our combat search and rescue. That was about the time when I sued Donald Rumsfeld. So I had been promoted 4 years ahead of my peers, but I obviously ruffled some feathers. So I asked to come back to Tucson. I was deployed a few more times, actually, back to Saudi Arabia. And then later on, I stayed in the Air Force. I got picked for squadron commander. I took over command of the 354th Fighter Squadron, and I took my squadron from Tucson, Arizona, all the way over to Afghanistan. I took over command in 2004 and brought them over in 2005, deployed there 2005, 2006.
So talk about the combat, because the A-10 is for close ground support combat, and so that is not for the faint of heart. So describe what that was like in Afghanistan.
Well, every mission and every day was different. We would sometimes take off on, there's no such thing as a routine combat mission, but we might be supporting some movement on the ground and providing that close air support overhead, or a planned special operations mission where we were covered either during the day or at night to be able to provide fire support. But we would take off every day on our dashboard with maps of all of Afghanistan, because we were often diverted to troops under fire. And we would be given a call sign, a radio frequency, and a grid coordinate, and told, go help them. They're under fire. They're troops in contact. And so we would have times where we would just show up. There's never more profound experience than talking to an American on the ground who's under fire, as you're trying to figure out also, where's the good guys, where's the bad guys. From 3 dimensions, it looks very different from what they see down there on the ground. And the risk of friendly fire is often very high because they're on the move, they're in close proximity, it's not a clean front line. And so getting that situational awareness is critical under the stress of the moment that the ambush and the firefight is going on, but you need to make sure you protect them from friendly fire if there's a miscalculation. And so every mission was different, day and night, some diversions to different parts of Afghanistan. One of my most complex I talk about, in my book, in a canyon in South Afghanistan where my entire system had failed, my entire heads-up display failed, and the special forces were in a winding canyon, and they were under ambush and dispersed, and some climbing up the walls of the canyon, low on ammo, low on water. And we had to show up and provide their cover and go in there, with the guns to be able to take out the bad guys and protect the friendlies. And my entire system failed on me. He used his pocket mirror to shine the sun into my eyes to show where he was. Sometimes we have some amazing systems, but sometimes the simplest things work. But I was able to deliver firepower that day, even with World War II level calculations, where you have to start at the right distance and altitude and dive angle and speed with about 3 to 5 seconds on final, with some calculations on your knee board to be able to come down final, clear it hot, make those quick corrections, and deliver that firepower. And that was a daunting mission because of the risks of friendly fire, but I had to do it, and I had been trained to do it, and I did it many times back here in Arizona at the Goldwater Ranges and other places. And in that moment, I had to just say a prayer and do what I was trained to do, and we were able to get them all out safely that night.
So it sounds like anything, the more you do it, the more confidence you have, but every case with the terrain and where people are and the logistics, everything's different each time.
Yes, everything's different. So I think the skills, I talk about in my book about you have to learn how to do things afraid. People think those of us who served in the military, we're just like, we wake up courageous, like we don't deal with fear. Of course we deal with fear. It's a human emotion. When you're in these complex circumstances, you should feel afraid. It's how we manage our fear and still function. And we build that confidence through our training. We build that confidence through our support to each other. We build that decision-making process to manage those risks and that fear. And that's like an athlete. We train. And then you just have to be flexible and keep your situational awareness, because what worked on your last mission might not work on this mission. So you've got to figure out, this time we've got guys on the ground who can do a laser spot, or we've got a drone overhead. We're talking to people who are in Nevada, using a infrared beam while we're using our night vision goggles, and we're spotting it in the targeting pod. It's a complex, each situation is complex, and you've got to be able to be light on your feet, but not let your fear get the best of you.
And so it's while you were in Afghanistan that I believe you were given command of a fighter squadron. So that is another first. What did that job entail, and how did the people under you respond to that?
It was the highest honor of my life. I was given command actually in 2004 to 2006, but then in Afghanistan, having command of the 354th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron, bringing my troops over there, my team and my troops. It's amazing. Like a family when you're in combat. We were providing 24/7 operations. Christmas Eve, I have a very specific memory of being out on the flight line in the freezing cold while our maintenance troops were dealing with a particularly challenging engine situation on one of our planes. And we just needed to keep the cover going. The enemy didn't care that it was Christmas. We needed to provide that air support for them. So it was the absolute highest honor of my life to be able to command men and women in combat. We won the Air Force Association Schilling Award for the best contribution in the field of flight that year. While we were overhead, no American was injured or died, providing that support. And it was just an absolute honor. Incredible. Really highest honor of my life.
That's an amazing record of not losing anyone. And that award, I'm sure, felt good. Not only were you making history, you did it so well that you won one of the most prestigious awards that the Air Force can give. So,
well, that was our team. We had an amazing team of airmen, both pilots, our life support, and all the maintenance team. Everybody, we worked together as a team in order to make the mission happen. The pilots often get the accolades, but we could not make it happen without everybody coming together and doing their part. And you know that. I mean, that's the way it is with any team and any military unit.
You also, and we've talked about this in the book, kind of with the story about the abaya in Saudi Arabia, but doing what you have to do, even if it's uncomfortable. And it's while you were in Afghanistan that you also had the additional distraction of kind of being blamed in a number of ways for a rape that you had finally let folks know about. I know you made headlines in 2019 for talking about it during a Senate hearing. You didn't report it at the time because you didn't think that it was going to be received well, which is a damning commentary on what you thought of the system at the time. So why didn't you think the system was ready for the accusation? And then explain what you have seen since then and what you hope to see.
Well, so many women and men have been through this throughout the course of their lives, both in and out of the military. I mean, it's just the reality of so much that so many have gone through, and many of us choose not to report it. I mean, that's a personal choice. At the time when it happened to me, I was just trying to survive and survive personally. I was just trying to get through the day, get through the next day, be able to keep doing my job and my mission. I found just as a human, I compartmentalized, and which is a good skill, by the way, for us to have, that we can be in combat. We cannot be distracted by our emotions, but that doesn't mean the depth of what you've experienced doesn't have impact on you. So that was a long journey for me to even acknowledge and share with others what I had been through. And then later on, when I was trying to help the Air Force, I talk about this in our book. I love our Air Force. I love our military. And I was trying to help them understand that, sometimes they can stereotype. And they were trying to send me off to the Air Force Academy to help with some of the challenges they were having there with sexual assault. And I had not shared publicly my own experiences. And I thought, I don't want to be in a position where they're saying, look, here we have women like Martha McSally who didn't have any problems, any experiences. And I was like, integrity first. I didn't feel it at the time. I mean, we all make our decisions. I wasn't going to try and convict somebody in the court of public opinion. I had looked through my legal options later on, and there's not a lot of good options. Especially when so much time has gone by. So for me, I had come to a place of healing, and now I just wanted to help the institution. I wanted to help them understand some of the challenges, and they just really screwed it up. I mean, just to be frank, the way they dealt with it was just so wrong and so bizarre. It just broke my heart that they just could so not understand the dynamics of sexual assault and not understand the impact that it has on people, and how a lot of the perpetrators are hiding in plain sight and they're out of central casting. And it's not based on how you might stereotype them, but what decisions they're making when nobody's looking, to prey upon somebody else. So I just really, not an easy time for me to push through this while I was seeing the system mess up, even me trying to help them fix it in the way they responded. I share the details of that in my book. Again, this isn't about just my case. I didn't want to get into gory details of my case, but share that it's a responsibility of us leaders to teach the next generation. I think people are well-intended, wanting to not make sure these things don't happen, but sometimes they're just ignorant. They don't know how it happens. They don't know what the ways are to prevent it or how to deal with it when it happens. So I feel like I'm in a role to be a leader on that right now, and I'm doing my part in the Senate.
Do you feel like it's significantly different now than when you first decided not to report the assault against you?
Absolutely. Look, I think these crimes are very difficult no matter what, whether when they happen in civilian world or in the military, they're very difficult to prosecute. But there is now a system where a victim can immediately go get help, can go get immediate medical help, can go get immediate mental health support, counseling. They can choose or not choose to go forward with a investigation and a prosecution. So they don't have to sit back alone and try and make all those decisions right after they've been assaulted. They can go get some support. And then they have this is unique to the military, they have a victim's advocate, and they have a specific lawyer who's there to advocate for them. That's unique. And really the civilian world is now looking at how they might be able to model this, because it provides more options for victims to be able to heal. And if they want to take the route, to go through the investigation in the judicial process, but ultimately it still is their choice. And I know that's hard for some people to believe, like, you should just go through it. It's just not that simple. The best thing that we can do is prevent these things from happening in the first place. So I think the system is much better to handle cases, to provide justice and support to victims. We still need to do more work on the prevention side. There's things that we need to do in order to stop these crimes from happening in the first place. I think people feel more confident in reporting, but it's far better to stop the crimes altogether.
Now, one part of your biography that we didn't mention, in the late 90s, you spent some time working on Capitol Hill for then Senator John Kyle. And so you retired from the Air Force in 2010. And so, first of all, why did you retire to Arizona? And secondly, what made you decide just a couple years later to run for Congress?
Well, Arizona is where my heart is. I first came to Arizona to go to pilot training in the summer of 1990 at Williams Air Force Base, which is now closed, and then came to Davis-Monthan in 1994 to fly the A-10. Davis-Monthan is the home of the A-10. I bought my home, the same one I'm in right now, in 1994, and I was blessed to have 4 assignments at Davis-Monthan. That's not normal, plus working for Senator Kyle. So Arizona is where my adult home and heart is. I love the weather. I love the spirit. I love the people. And so when I retired, obviously I was going to come back here. And it's part of the don't walk by a problem. A part of our culture as veterans and in the military, that if we're complaining about something, we better be willing to do something about it. Yes, I had the opportunity to be a legislative fellow, but I didn't leave that assignment like, oh, I want to run for office someday. I hate politics. I joke that that's one reason I left the military. But I couldn't help this call to duty churning inside me. I found myself yelling at the television, what's going on in DC? And why can't those people get their act together? And I learned from Senator Kyle. He's a man of character, hard work, integrity, and really a workhorse. And I remember saying, we need people like that. So I felt this call to duty to step up and get into this new combat zone to continue my my service, because I think we need veteran-minded people who are willing to serve, sacrifice, get the mission done, put aside differences, do what's best for the country. And that mindset is sorely needed in DC.
So 2012, a very narrow defeat. And then 2014, a very narrow victory. And so explain how your military service then informed your service in the House and now the Senate.
Yeah, in 2012, I actually went to freshman orientation. I was in the freshman photo, voted for the speaker, and then I had to go home and concede the race after 14 days. But then in 2014, it took 43 days to call the race, and I won by a whopping 167 votes. So the joke is my new call sign is landslide, after that. I see this as a continuation of my service. When I raised my right hand in the House and the Senate, it was the same exact oath that I took as a military officer. So I see this as a continuation of my service to our country in civilian clothes. Some of the things I learned in the military, some of the things we've shared today, don't walk by a problem, be creative, persevere, figure out what it takes to fix something. I often ask, does this literally take an act of Congress to fix? And if it does, well, let's do something about it. I think that mindset of mission focused, of serving, of making a difference is really helped me. Last year, I tied for first getting the most bills signed into law of any senator, and I'd only been there a year. And I'm in the top 10 most bipartisan members of the Senate based on me just finding common ground. Look, I have personal philosophy, a conservative philosophy, but I look at where's the Venn diagram overlap if I'm actually trying to get something solved and it has to get through the House and the Senate and signed by the president. It's like Schoolhouse Rock. You may be too young to even know what that is, but a bill becomes a law. You got to be practical and pragmatic, and that's what veterans are. That's our mindset.
And your military experience prepared you well for that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Just the persistence, the pragmatic approach, the mission focused, the figuring out how to find teams to move something forward, putting aside your, selfish, interests and serving others. All of that, I think, has really helped me. You got to keep your sense of humor, too, in this combat zone. I mean, when we're deployed under tough circumstances, also just getting through difficult times and keeping focused on the mission and not being distracted by other things. All those things from my military service really help.
2 questions before we let you go, Senator. First of all, it's obviously a very eventful Air Force career. If you could pinpoint it, what are you most proud of?
I'm definitely most proud of commanding men and women in combat as the commander of the 354th Fighter Squadron. Absolute highest honor of my life. I do it again in a heartbeat. And I'm so proud of the men and women who served with me and the lives that we were able to save. We've just passed Memorial Day, and I've checked in with families, Gold Star families that I know whose loved ones did not come back. We were able to ensure that some loved ones did come back. And for whatever reason, even though sometimes, I had a couple, experiences that I don't understand why I lived through them, but I did. And it propels us to live on the legacy of those who made the ultimate sacrifice. So it was an absolute honor to be able to command in combat. That was definitely it.
And then lastly, what advice would you give to a young woman who's either a cadet or considering a career in the military? Obviously, the conditions are a lot different now than when you entered the armed forces. And I'm guessing a lot of your advice can be found in the book, as we've talked about. But what would you tell a young woman who's considering or beginning a military career right now?
Yes, for sure. Go to daretofly.us, get a copy of the book, but then also share your inspiration with me. There's a place there where you can contact me. I just want to be inspired as well. I need to be inspired every single day. My advice would be to find your path and your dream. We need patriots, men and women who are willing to serve and sacrifice. It's not easy. You got to have thick skin. Without losing your humanity, but it's definitely worth it to serve and sacrifice and be a part of something greater than yourself. So look to the pioneers before you. I had the women World War II veterans who were my inspiration and my pioneers, and look for people around you. It doesn't matter if they're men or women. Those who you want to emulate, those who you want to learn from, help to be a wingman to others. We never fly solo. We always fly with somebody else to support and encourage. So look for those people around you as well.
Senator, thank you for your time today. And most of all, thank you for your incredible service to our country, both in uniform and continuing now in the halls of Congress. We appreciate your time.
Absolutely. It's an honor. Thanks. Go to daretofly.us, get a copy of the book, and share your story with me.
Daretofly.us. Martha McSally is a retired U.S. Air Force colonel. She is a current U.S. Senator from the state of Arizona. And again, the book is Dare to Fly, Simple Lessons in Never Giving Up. I'm Greg Corombos, and this is Veterans Chronicles.